biggest problem. That's one of the biggest problems that we have. The marketing teams and everybody else is out there charging, going, hey, it's going to solve all of our problems. It'll fix everything. We can go relax on the beach. We can have a drink and let AI take over. The challenge and the reality is if you look at the two different levels of AI. So if we focus just on actual artificial intelligence, there's really only two areas. You have a very narrow AI, which something like IBM Watson, Darktrace, and a lot of the others have, which is very good at doing certain tasks. And then you have a broader spectrum of AI, which unfortunately is what we tend to try to tell people that we have. And that is, we have that a long, long way. We have a lot more work to do on that one before we get there. And I think even honestly, unfortunately, even in our industry, we mix up augmented intelligence with artificial intelligence, with machine learning, with just simply somebody putting some fuzzy logic around some code. And we haven't got a good yardstick. One of the companies I'm hanging out with is actually doing some work to put that yardstick in place. Calypso's doing a really nice job of it, but we've got a lot of work to go yet.
So do you see kind of some efficiencies being generated from the AI? Because I think normally the difficulty sometimes that I have personally is explaining the board if AI will bring, what AI is going to bring for the business, because one, they are more worry about money-wise or investment-wise in order to return. So, for example, if we're going to buy some certain appliance that provides us some efficiency or gains on threat analysis or maybe vulnerability kind of management, what we have to say maybe to convince them board the AI is fundamental for us to have?
And that's a really good point, because I mean, let's take one area. So one of the biggest challenges we have in this industry is managing all of the inputs. You know, in security, we turn around and say, you have to know your environment, you have to know your assets, you have to know what things are going on, because an attacker is always going to get in. Well, that means you have to take in a ton of data. So you can't have enough people just watching all the logs. It just doesn't work. So you end up with security orchestration, automation technology, and a lot of that is meant to have a very narrow AI built into it. So if that works more effectively, then yes, you can go to the board and say, hey, let's have the conversation about risk reduction, about increased awareness. Let's have the conversation about the human capital necessary to effectively put this in place. So there's definitely some efficiencies to be gained, but there's a lot of, again, it's knowing the right questions to ask so that you can put artificial intelligence in place effectively. Yeah,
I think that's a very valid point, because I think normally what comes with cybersecurity is very complex environment, and you touch base on the orchestration. It's something that is growing since the landscape of assets also is growing with the demand of the digital transformation, because let's be honest, I think no company has prepared enough to be in the environment totally digital. So every time that I see companies today, they always used to kick the stones in that sense.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think, you know, I mean, I've got a spreadsheet, and I'm happy to share it. We could share it for the audience at some point in time. It's not even a spreadsheet, it's a set of questions. And literally the very first one is, do we need AI to solve our problem? You know, it's one of these things, we always throw artificial intelligence out there. I've got all this big data, I need AI to figure it out. And quite honestly, more often than not, you don't. And I think as a business, you need to actually sit there and go, look, is a narrow AI or is a good AI a solution for us? Let alone all the other questions that go with it. In other words, how we're going to train it, how we're going to monitor it, and how we're going to manage it. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't always ask that first question. We just let the vendor tell us, hey, you really need this.
But I think, do you believe that AI is kind of being a kind of everything now become AI and becomes like a marketing tool as well for most of the vendors out there? And I think now it's kind of a completely marketing. And I mean, coming from the background on technology, for me, the way that I see is an if and else. That's it. I mean, it's probably predicting based on the kind of historical data or some predefined data that you already have. But I don't see yet the evolution that everyone is saying about that. It's kind of, it does a lot of work by itself.
Yeah, the predictive nature is the huge part of it. This is where we get to the narrow AI stuff. And to your point, it's, you know, if you're putting an intelligent system in place, there's some simple questions you've got to ask, which is, what's the quantity and the quality of data that we can feed it so it can even get a baseline, so it can learn? You take SOAR. SOAR has to understand what is acceptable in my environment, what my baseline is, and what those deltas are. And it's going to take that from the available information, plus it's going to take it from some outside information to understand it. And then you've got to understand, how does it actually determine? How does it understand how it learns? What supervised learning, what unsupervised learning it does, how the actual system does a rules-based, is it search-based, and all these things that people tend not to ask. Because I would absolutely agree, not every single problem that we have needs to be solved with AI. Some of it just needs to be solved with people sitting down and getting on and getting the work done.
It's fantastic. And just let me welcome everyone on board, because everyone is in the chat. So Chris, I'm just going to speak a little Portuguese just to open for the audience to also send some questions. Sejam todos bem-vindos. Por favor, mandem suas perguntas. O Chris está aqui para responder e eu consigo passar todas as perguntas. Fique à vontade de mandar em inglês ou em português. Tá, Chris, so I just mentioned to the audience to ask also some questions for you as we are going along with this. So fantastic. So do we have any kind of system that can predict 0 days today, Chris? What do you see about that? Because there's a lot of promises around. We do everything, but it's kind of I saw so many things interesting when you go to events, right? Promises, and you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, I do so know what you're talking about. I really want to mention vendor names, but I won't mention vendor names because I don't want you getting yelled at. I don't care if I get yelled at. I don't want you getting yelled at.
Thank you.
There are a couple of vendors, shall we say, that overpromise and arguably underdeliver. And I think part of it is, again, what we don't have is a good yardstick, and we don't have a good set of measurements. If I turn around and say, hey, I've got the world's best AI or the world's best AI in cybersecurity, well, by what measure? Because you can detect things or because you can predict things? And are you only doing it in a very, very narrow band? My joke is always artificial intelligence, until it wakes up in the morning, demands a cup of coffee, grumbles because it doesn't want to work, refuses to deal with the coworkers because they smell, it's not AI. It's nothing more than a set of instructions that you've given some leeway to. Now, if you take that to narrow AI, can it go after 0 days? No, not effectively. But can it look at predictive nature? Could it take a look at the code that we have? Could it compare that to all the attack vectors that are out there and say, hey, look, I can predict that something's going to happen? Another probably a better example. Part of my background is dealing with deception technology. So there are some really good deception technologies out there. And the logic is simple. The attacker's going to get in. What are they going to do next? So if I can learn the tactics, let's say I know that your tactic is to get in, to compromise, to pivot, and to do some other things. If I see a behavior, so behavior analytics, if I see a certain type of behavior, I can predict or put some predictive analytics in to say, look, I expect you to do A, B, C, and D with 80, 90% certainty. And if you deviate from that, then maybe I can take a different nature. I can apply good machine learning. I can apply a very narrow set of AI to that, but you have to do something to indicate so that I can respond to it. So it's not AI as far as we do it. So we've got a long way to go still on this one, a long, long way to go.
It is amazing to mention that. And Chris, just for us to kind of moving ahead, how do you see the new cyber professionals coming along? What is the best skills they can gain or adapt, or what is the path for a beginner to start to work on the cybersecurity? Because those are the main questions today. Is how do I start? How do I become a professional in cybersecurity? Because sometimes the word cybersecurity becomes something scary, as we say, but how we can send a message for the new people to start on the cybersecurity path?
I mean, you're right. I mean, when I started, it wasn't even really security. It was just part of technology. And then obviously now there's so many areas that security goes across. So I think it's a couple of different things. I think it's find your passion. I think that's the biggest one, because at the end of the day, we all have to work for a living. So if I enjoy coding, then maybe I go look for a route in DevSecOps. I can help out security coding. I can help operators. If I enjoy just the digging in and the crazy tearing to pieces of systems, then you've got forensics, then you've got red team and SOC and NOC and everything else. If I enjoy compliance, and there are people that enjoy compliance and rules and regulations, then it's helping to understand how to turn compliance into something users can use. And the same thing with users, it's the same thing with hanging out with the crew over at Wiser. I love helping to educate, I love helping to train, so I can use that platform to train people. So for me, the first part is find out what I care about. After that, it's, okay, now I need a baseline. I need to understand what technology is. I need to understand how the computer works. Go buy a used one from an ARC store for $10 or the equivalent over there, and take it to pieces and find out how it works. Get a base understanding of how a network works. Get some simple coding languages. It's useful. Just some simple stuff like Perl, C++, and even scripting languages. And then get involved in the community. LinkedIn is a perfectly good example on that one. Get involved in the B-Sides community. The B-Sides community is absolutely amazing. I mean, it's without question absolutely amazing. And you can get involved in the forums. You can talk. You can get involved in all sorts of other areas. Get involved in the bug crowds and the hack ones and all the other ones, the various other like the Cobalt IO and the various other ones like that, where they bring people in and you help with pen testing. And so there's all of these different places that you can get involved. A lot of it is self-motivation. I'm not a big believer in certificates. I'm a big believer in experience. I want somebody to go, hey, I've got a screwdriver and I've got a USB stick, and how can I help? I mean, that's it.
That definitely is a curiosity, right? So that's the curiosity, creativity. Yeah. So those are kind of the softer skills that I think anyone can have and can be curious about, right? So that's how we start to be curious about hacking, or the mindset of hacking, as everyone says. Chris, it's fantastic to be talking to you. So I'm very pleased to have you on the channel. I think the critical infrastructure as well, since that we start to talk about AI, is something that I cannot believe that we're gonna use as well. And I want to ask you, what you have been seeing around since that we started COVID-19, and I don't want to talk too much about the COVID-19, because I think finally we're gonna go one day finishing this, but the surface of attack as well has increased from the critical infrastructure, from the companies that wasn't prepared to have it. And now ransomwares are kind of spiking again across many organizations. And when you believe certain organizations were prepared for it, actually no, or there is no such a thing, right? Because no one is 100% safe, and there is no 100% security for sure. But can you tell us what you've been seeing around US, for example, to share? So since that you are in US, I'm in London, and people in Brazil is watching. This is a kind of a global audience, so that's why I want to thank you as well for your time to be with us.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, appreciate it being on. It's fun hanging out. Totally fun hanging out. So it's interesting. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've got, I see a lot of stuff in the US and Europe and actually Middle East and various other areas. So to your point, I mean, we scattered. When you think about it, companies scattered to the four winds, and the company mentality changed. Because for right or for wrong, a company was like, okay, you're inside my building, I can protect you, which we obviously know isn't true. But the mentality was there. You're inside, I can protect you. I give you your computer, I can protect you. I provide you with a VPN, I provide you with a network that's safe and secure. And so the mentality was there was this hard shell around the company. Well, now that's disappeared, because now everybody's working from home. Some have had to use family computers. They've had to go out and buy computers. They share computers. I mean, Brazil, perfect example. You look at how many people don't have access to a normal computer to work on. They've got a phone. You can't do your regular work on a phone. So now you have a distributed workforce. So I've scattered the people. And if you look at military tactics, the best way to win is to disperse people and pick them off one by one by one by one. And so that's what the adversaries are doing. That's why we have so much ransomware. It's because now I'm operating in my silo. I'm operating at home. I have to think for myself more effectively. I have to rely on my training, which you didn't give me. You trained me once a year to say, don't click on anything, don't send anything. And by the way, I'm going to make you watch the same training video that you watched last year that you remember the answers for. I mean, it's useless. And we didn't teach the human. We taught them to comply with our rules. I didn't look at you and go, how can I help you? How can I help you protect your kids? How can I help you protect your family? How can I help you protect your parents, your grandparents, your guardians? I didn't do any of that. So now I have to go back and teach those lessons really quickly, because you're at home on a work computer, but your family is all around you. So how do I teach you that more effectively? So that's a big one. That's why ransomware has taken off so much, because it's just easier to pick us off one by one. And we're humans. We want, and again, we're in COVID, and whether it's COVID now or something in the future, we want to help our fellow human. So I'm always going to click, I'm always going to reach out, and I'm always going to do something that the security team probably told me I shouldn't do, because I want to help people. And so that's what people are preying on, which is why we're having so many issues. And exactly to your point, we didn't prepare. We thought we did. We had incident response plans, but we never tested them. We didn't run tabletop scenarios. They're free. You don't have to break into anybody. You can run those at home. It's like Dungeons and Dragons for adults. And so we didn't do any of that. We didn't train, we didn't test. So yeah, we're in a problem. And you know, the US is obviously seeing a ton of it. And obviously it's a huge amount across Europe and everywhere else.
No, it's fantastic, Chris. Thank you again for your time. We're definitely coming to the end of our short interview. Cyber Talks is just a quick chat about with the brightest mind in cybersecurity, and you are on our wall. So with many others, so it's always a privilege to bring people to share the knowledge. Chris, do you have anything to add? I'm really pleased to have you tonight in London, in the afternoon for you in US, and probably in the afternoon for Brazilians as well.
I just want to say thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure. And I mean, Brazil, we talked about it briefly. I was talking to a friend of mine. I'm like, I get to go to Brazil virtually, but I get to go to Brazil. And so I'm really pleased. I think for me, a final thought, all I want anybody to do is just ask one more question. That's it. If you get an email in, if somebody tries to sell you or tell you something, just play that out in the real world and ask yourself one more question. That's all I can ever ask people to do. Take an extra 30 seconds and ask one more question. That's it. And hopefully people will be a little bit safer.
Right. Thank you very much. Have a nice afternoon there. And thank you guys for following us today on the Cyber Talks.